So, covered a lot of ground about compassion. I want to circle back to expand a little bit about things that can get in the way, specifically about compassion for difficult people, and to speak about the aspect of attitude that is right effort. So, as many of you have expressed in the meetings and in the sharings and in the questions, this and well, not just this category, but many of the categories can bring not just resistance, but particularly difficult mind states that we've already talked about in terms of the near and the far enemy. And I want to zoom in a little bit on the far enemy tonight to begin with. As you know, it's cruelty, but I also want to include different related mind states that can arise, particularly with this category of the hostile person, somebody who has harmed us. So, cruelty in itself, I think, is actually a very interesting mind state because even very good hearted people can have moments of totally losing it and wishing somebody to have something horrible happen to them. This is actually such a fascinating process because it's like we lose our humanity for a moment. And for most of us, it takes quite something for this to happen. Somebody does something, just something that is past the point of bad going into evil, or they're doing something in a prolonged way that feels like it could endanger the world. A cursory reading of the news anytime in the last 5 years could bring this up. Sometimes what can come up when we read of horrors that people are in the process of creating for the world, we have a moment of, oh, I wish that person would go to sleep tonight and never wake up, or something even worse. I was a little shocked actually to discover today. I did a Google search for something that started with P. And when I put the P in, you know how Google shows you possibilities. One of the second one on the list was Putin assassination. So obviously, just that, what that told me, I was a little surprised, but it told me, oh, cruelty is something that's very common in the world right now, in people's minds, even though it might not be coming out of their mouths. Like anger, cruelty is often a secondary emotion. And if you look to see what's under it, it's often fear. Fear is something that is underestimated in terms of being a driving force for unwholesome action. So much unwholesome action in ourselves and in the world is rooted in fear. And usually when that happens, we're not even aware of it. So any of you who have reported experiencing fear in the practice in the last days, consider yourself fortunate. You see it. What we don't see can really drive the train into a bad direction. But what we actually see, what is in our field of view, cannot control us. We might take it seriously. We might be stuck there, but we see it. And that's half of our work in the practice. So cruelty has some cousins that are worth focusing on a little bit. One of these is what is in German called Schadenfreude. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Iris will tell me, yeah, it's good. And Schadenfreude is a really interesting mind state. This is such an interesting mind state because it's one of those forms of unwholesome thought that actually, when we experience it, is delicious. It feels pleasant. And Schadenfreude is rejoicing in the misfortune of an enemy or somebody who's done us some wrong. So perhaps there's somebody who has harmed us or harmed the world, or some political figure we detest, and something bad happens to them. And we secretly sit there and go, oh, good, it serves them right. So this is a mind state that doesn't show up in action, but it's something that many people think without admitting to others about, because it's kind of a shameful state, but it's very, very common. Where it really comes out is where people can be anonymous. So go to Twitter any day of the week and you'll see a lot of this. And people aren't usually anonymous there, but the more anonymous, poisonous parts of the, social media, it can be very, very, I don't know, I don't have many of these accounts, but people tell me, oh, it's really quite toxic
Mhm.
and full of this state of Schadenfreude. So watch your mind, really watch your mind carefully when something bad happens to somebody you don't like. And notice if this is arising. And if it is, don't feed it. It's really toxic. So Schadenfreude is, as I've said, something that arises in the mind that doesn't play out in action so much. A related state, spite in English, is something that plays, it's related and it comes in action. And spite is what we do just because we can. When
It,
somebody has harmed us and there's no real reason to do it, but we harm them back. And this is an
mm,
act of cruelty more than a thought of cruelty. It's just uncontrolled. You did this to me and I'm going to do this to you just because I can. So it plays out, it's playing out right now in world affairs. And it often plays out in a really difficult way in workplaces that don't have a clear and balanced relationship between coworkers. So if somebody does something to you and you feel like retaliating just to be unkind, that's spite. Just to return the suffering that they have caused us. It's an act of malice. It's an act of malice or pure unkindness. It's less familiar to most of us than Schadenfreude because it's cruelty in action, and most of us are not cruel people. So really talking about it is more context than anything else. So these states of mind that manifest, these states of cruelty that sometimes manifest when we have to deal in life or in practice with hostile people, we work with them exactly the same way as we work with any other mind state in the
mm,
practice. Remembering the proper attitude towards these difficult states. These are mind states that are not personal. They don't mean we are bad people for having had them. It
so
doesn't
that,
also mean that we're bad meditators for having had them. It's easy to say that, but often those judgments about ourselves come in just because it's such a strong habit. So we can also feel guilty, not just judging ourselves, but we can actually feel guilty for having had these, especially Schadenfreude, which does have, as I said, have that, it has that delicious aspect, and we can get caught there for a while, and then when we emerge, it's like, oh, that was bad. I shouldn't have done that. And then, of course, we think, oh my goodness, I've been meditating for decades and I'm still feeling this. I'm just never going to get it right. The
mm,
judgment comes in. Here's where a reality check is necessary. Who knows how long these habits have been cultivated? How many years? How many lifetimes? Expecting a few decades of metta practice to undo those habits completely might, if they're very, very strong, it might be just too ambitious. Remembering about the basic purpose of this Karuna practice is to bring us into connection with the difficult sides of our psyche. I said at the outset, the whole week we'll be learning to be with suffering. And a big part of that is learning to be with our own suffering and our own negativity. And I say our own as more of a shorthand for these states that arise and pass away in this mind and body in a very impersonal way. They're not ours. So understanding whatever our habit patterns are in terms of cruelty or schadenfreude or spite or resistance or anger, any of these related states is a big part of coming to terms with them as simple habits. knowing our habit patterns is what helps us come to terms with the fact that they are there just as impersonal habit patterns. And this whole practice is about creating a habit of compassion, just as the practice of metta is creating a habit of loving kindness. So there are unwholesome habits, there are wholesome habits. We choose which we feed and which we don't feed. It's incredibly simple, actually. So we have these wholesome patterns, habit patterns that are impersonal, and unwholesome ones that are also impersonal. We, in each moment, can choose where to direct our energy. And in fact, the classical definition of right effort, samavayama, is about feeding what is wholesome and supporting what is wholesome and disengaging from what is unwholesome. It's about where we direct our energy, not at all about how much effort we make. So a proper attitude towards difficulty is joined by a proper use of our energy to disengage from unwholesome action. Many of you have heard me quote this verse from the Dhammapada in the context of metta retreats. But the Buddha, go ahead. The Buddha says, cultivate the wholesome, refrain from the unwholesome, purify the mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. So cultivate the wholesome, refrain from the unwholesome, purify the mind. All the Buddhas, one after another, ours and one's in the past, one's in the future. This is the core of their teaching. So maybe we're in the middle of a meditation session and we have a moment of pure cruelty. Besides being shocking, we wonder, what do I do with this? Simple, nothing. We refrain from it, feeding it. Just like any mind state, we acknowledge its presence. We can even label it. It's like, oh, that was a moment of cruelty. And having identified its presence, we don't go towards it, we go away from it, to not out of suppression, but simply to take our energy to the wholesome. And even without a linear thought, but sometimes it feels like we look at it and go, whoa, I don't want to put my energy there. I'm going back to Karuna. I've often had the thought in practice, it's like, I think I'm just going to go back to planting seeds right now. I'm not feeding that. And the mind may have a fascination with it or an attachment with it and might keep trying to go back there. But we keep just patiently going, no, come over here. Let's plant some seeds. It's important we see this as just a direction of energy and don't apply force, because force is a manifestation of trying to suppress whatever it is. So notice how you're thinking about whatever that state is. Is there a harshness in your language or lightness? In the original texts, there are many stories about Mara. And Mara's main job is to keep people from going towards the wholesome, particularly preventing them from going towards awakening. So there are many stories in the text of somebody sitting there minding their own business, meditating in the forest, and this thought comes that's totally out of left field, as we say in English, just like maybe cruelty or lust or something unwholesome. And often the response is, this must be Mara. And I kind of read between the lines there, because often I've had a thought, it's like, who thought that? That wasn't me. So you can say, oh, hello, Mara. I see you. Or you can say something to yourself like, oh, thank you for sharing. I'm not sure I want to follow that thought. Or, that's a light way of holding some of these thoughts. Or we might find ourselves going, there's this immediate pulling away. It's like, I don't want to see that. I don't want that to be here. I'm just going to do whatever I can to go in the other direction. That is force. When our attitude towards that state is laced with aversion, whatever we do is only going to feed the unwholesome. So how we feed unwholesome mind states can be direct by actually following them, but it can also be indirect by resisting them. And when we do this for the whole day, it's exhausting. So one hint, one indication that we're not applying right effort is exhaustion at the end of the day. Maybe we're not completely comfortable with all those unwholesome mind states, and we're making a lot of energy to force the mind to the wholesome. We're making a lot of effort to create conditions of concentration where those unwholesome states will not arise. And it's possible to do that. It's possible to really make a lot of effort and become quite concentrated. But again, it's exhausting because we're not accepting the presence of those unwholesome mind states. We're trying to suppress them. So the way to deal with these difficult mind states is not suppression, but depriving them of energy. So finding the pleasantness of wholesome mind states is a critical part of this because we can treat the mind like a small child. You know, a little kid who is really fascinated with something that they don't have, we don't want them to go near. So we distract them with something even better. Or like a puppy who wants to chew on the furniture, so we give them a squeaky toy instead, and they chew on that. So part of the practice, and this is a funny way of putting it, but it feels this way sometimes. Part of an onward leading practice is finding what is for us the inner squeaky toy, finding those aspects of wholesome mind states that are so much more pleasant than the unwholesome that we want to go there instead. So when you experience a moment or more than a moment, a few moments or a sitting where you're really connected with compassion and the heart's open and it's quite a pleasant state. We can be so afraid of clinging to this that we don't want to feel it, the pleasantness. But you can acknowledge that pleasantness in a sort of a vipassana way. It's like, oh, pleasant, pleasant, pleasant. Really acknowledge the pleasantness of open-heartedness. Allow the mind to become familiar with it, to taste that pleasantness. So next time you have a choice between this unwholesome mind state and this wholesome one, the mind looks at that and goes, forget the unwholesome, I'm going to the wholesome because it's so much more pleasant. So right effort as feeding the wholesome and refraining from the unwholesome. This becomes critically important when we meet the edges of what we can comfortably be with. When we can connect with compassion for somebody's suffering, but it's right on the edge of what's bearable. What's really important when that happens is not to try to push through that edge, not to increase the effort, but just gently apply energy to incline to the wholesome in as much as you are able to do that. Sometimes right effort is backing off. Planting seeds can look like many things. It can look like formal sitting practice for hours on end. It can look like walking back and forth for hours on end. Or it can look like opening it up completely and not doing any formal practice at all. If you feel you are going to a place of overwhelm or a place where the mind is in absolute rebellion, it just does not want to go there, honor that and don't push it to go there. Don't ask too much from the heart. Don't ask the heart to do more than it can do. Taking a sideways step into metta practice can be pure right effort. It's not failing. It's taking care of yourself. I'm going to say this a number of times because I think people, it's very hard to hear, but it is totally okay to do that. And it's a manifestation of balanced practice. If we're just, just too close to the edge of overwhelm, backing off is a sensible thing to do. So I beg you, all of you know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I beg you not to assess your practice. This is good practice, this is bad practice. Well, that's just an idea, often based in some unreachable ideal, but we're not We're human beings, we're not ideas. So honor where you are. This is compassion. I really love, and those who practice it here at Shannon Yang in particular have heard the Sayadaw saying what he says to people in this situation. When people come to practice, one of the first things he says is eat enough, take enough rest. I think this is very sweet because it's a very Burmese thing. Eat, sleep. You need to do this. We Westerners need to learn how to back off and do that. So if you're super tired at the end of the day or at lunchtime, that's a sign that maybe you've been expending too much energy. And just tomorrow after lunch, take a nap. Do something to balance what you're doing so that you're not expending too much energy trying it very hard to cultivate something. Because we're not creating compassion and we're not sending it to somebody. We're just planting those seeds, creating the conditions for natural compassion to arise by itself. That's its job. We don't have to do it for compassion. It'll do it itself. And really resting back in who we are right now, whether it's full of wholesomeness or full of unwholesomeness. Using mindfulness to notice what's happening and then deciding for ourselves, what do we feed and what do we refrain from? And that's enough. And that's enough for me tonight. Thank you for your kind attention. And may you all be able to practice the gentlest of right efforts to open the heart with compassion. Thank you, everybody, for your kind attention.